Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. My guest today is Randi Silverman, and she is the founder and executive director of the Youth Mental Health Project. Randi, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on uplifting content.
Such a pleasure talking to you too. We were having a bit of a love fest before we started the show. I'm just, anything that's just about mental health, and especially mental health for youth, is everything I'm all about. So really excited about this conversation. To get us going, would you just share with us a bit about your background and how you got to be doing the work you are today?
Oh, that's, I'll try to not make that a whole movie in itself. I joke that I'm an accidental filmmaker, and in fact, I'm an accidental mental health advocate in general. And I think like anybody else, how do you get involved in work like this? It's through your own personal experience.
Yeah.
And before all of this, there's always this, the different thresholds of life. I, at one point, was an attorney. And then I was a stay-at-home mom of 3 boys for a very long time. And my journey into the work around mental health really came out of my experience as a mother of a child who struggled very seriously with his mental health at a very young age. And so that experience changed my life forever, as it does. Anytime you are a parent and your child struggles and suffers, it changes the way you see things, and it gives you perspective. And what happened was, he was very, very young, 8 years old by the time he was diagnosed with anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder. He was suicidal by the time he was 9.
Oh my.
And ultimately, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And he had about a 10-year period where he was truly very ill. And during that time, I look back and I see, the first thing is that in the very beginning of that period of time, I had no idea that kids could struggle with their mental health. For no apparent reason. I knew about trauma, or, if you were, of course, in a really horrific situation. But, here I was, an educated, woman, lucky enough to be able to stay at home. And we had a nice family, and my kids were, these 3 beautiful boys. What on earth would make a 9-year-old not want to live? It didn't make sense to me. And I always say, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And here I was as a young mother in this world where my child's behavior was so out of the norm. And I got a lot of helpful parenting tips about what I could do better. There was a lot of blame around his behavior. And I think we live in this hyper-parenting world, where parenting is we think it's our job to control our children's behavior, teach them good behavior. And when it doesn't work out that way, we struggle with all of that blame and shame. And that really keeps us in this very isolated, silent area, which hurts our children, because it takes that much longer for us to get them treatment when we feel we don't even know what we're looking at. And the teachers don't know what they're looking at, and the doctors don't always know what they're looking at. Anyway, so as I went through this journey with my child, I started doing a lot of research and reading, because my old lawyer brain kicked in, and I discovered what a massive problem this was. That this wasn't just an issue of me and my family. 1 in 5 kids struggle with a diagnosable mental health condition. That's in every neighborhood. Doesn't matter where you live. The statistics are 1 in 5. And I thought, where are all these other parents? Because, I look around in my neighborhood and I don't see it here. It's just me.
Right.
And then what I discovered was there were a world of millions of parents out there, and we're all hiding in our own little shells because we think it's just us, and we think it's our parenting. And the damage that is doing to, really to our country. I think is immense. And so I set out on a mission to change the dynamic, to say, if I had known differently, if I had known what I know now, my son would still have bipolar disorder. But I could perhaps have changed the trajectory of his illness, because early intervention makes a massive difference, as it does with any other health condition. The earlier you get to it, the better it is. And so anyway, I decided I'm going to change the narrative. I'm going to get out there and I'm going to share my story and change the narrative. And so that's how it all started. I don't know if that's exactly what you were asking me.
That was, and I love it. And I love kind of understanding how and why people have got to where they've got to. I think that's a really important component. And I just want to thank you for doing this sharing and building this organization to do that, because I found from my own experience, as soon as I talk openly about my experience with depression, the amount of people that will message me, thank you so much for saying that. I felt the same way. I've never wanted, I just feel awful about telling it to other people. This whole shame that we all have around mental illness, we just need to get to find that confidence to share honestly from the heart. And it is so helpful to others, just them hearing you say that. It's
about storytelling, right? I mean, if we stand up and share our stories, it makes all of the difference. I think the tricky part when you're talking about children is parents don't want to share their children's story for fear of labeling them forever, or their neighbors won't want to play with them anymore, or I mean, there's so much involved when it's a child, so we really hesitate. And I really believe that storytelling is super important. And once I opened my world to sharing with other parents, ever since then, my life has dramatically changed. So I'll tell you a little story. About 12 years ago, maybe it was 13. My son is now 22 years old, so I have to kind of calculate backwards. I started a support group once I realized, wait a minute, I know I'm not the only one out here. I had met this one other mom, and just meeting that one other mom, that connection, as you know, because you care about mental health, connection is so important. And I finally met another mom who wasn't judging me because her child was struggling similarly. And we got together and we said, we have to start a support group, because there are other parents out there who need us and need that belonging and that connection. And so this was before Facebook and before social media. We put up flyers and said, if you're concerned about your kids, emotional or mental health, if they're anxious, if they're depressed, come to this meeting. And the first meeting, we had 40 parents show up.
Whoa. Wow.
Strangers.
Yeah.
And as my world has become more and more open, and now my story is out publicly for the world to see, because I became a filmmaker and actually wrote and co-produced a film about our family's journey called No Letting Go. And the phone doesn't stop ringing, and the connections that I've made through people, and I feel that if we can connect with other parents who understand, that's where the empowerment is.
Agreed. And I'm just working on a book called Uplifting Stories, which is exactly what you just said. Yeah, just sharing people's stories and on all different sort of topics to help.
I love that. So, can't wait to read that.
Thanks. It should be due out in April 2020. I've just got the book deal. Yes,
that's so exciting. Good for you.
Thank you. So I just want to jump quickly back to something that you said earlier. When you said that if you knew what you knew now, you'd have done things differently, sort of with your son, he probably would have still had bipolar, you've done things differently. I'm just curious, like from your experience, what would you have done differently now you know this stuff?
Well, that's a big question, right? Early intervention is super important. Kids who struggle with their mental health need coping skills that for some reason they just don't have naturally, and they need to be taught those coping skills. And I could get into a whole discussion about social emotional learning that kids really need to be able to talk about and learn about their emotions and their feelings and how to process them. And we don't know how to do that as a society, really. And parents, we don't know how to do that. And if I really want to go back, I would start very young teaching him social emotional learning. We teach our kids happy, mad, sad. And it's just so much more complex than that. I like to call it emotional math. Sometimes mad is left out and confused. But sometimes mad is something completely different. And if we can get our kids to understanding the language of their feelings, I think that would make a world of difference. But even more so, once a child is struggling, taking them to a mental health professional and seeing, what kinds of things we could help them with to give them tools that they need. Right. Cognitive behavioral therapy is one example. Right. There are all sorts of tools, mindful meditation. I mean, there are tons of different tools, but we don't tend to realize that kids need that too. Right. And so I would have focused more on helping him through that. So what I knew as a parent, and I don't know if you had a chance to see the film, but in the film, you can see that my son struggled with what we call school refusal. He just couldn't, there were days he couldn't go to school. And he was little, second grade, third grade. And I'd sit on his bed and I'd say, tell me what's wrong. And he would say, oh, the teacher's mean, or, Joey gave me a dirty look, or my homework's too hard. And I would try to come up with things to fix it. Okay, well, I'll call the teacher, or we can work on math together. If I had the tools to sit down and really talk to him about the feelings that were underneath that. This is a whole conversation, this whole social emotional learning thing, but I'm a big believer in allowing our kids to feel their feelings. We don't do that as adults very often. Yeah. But when we're caring for our mental health, a big piece of it, I believe, is learning what we're feeling, and either embracing that and allowing it, and then trying to have the tools to manage those feelings. But you can't manage your feelings if you aren't aware of what they are in the first place. Yeah. And so we partnered with this amazing organization called Kimochis, and Kimochi stands for feelings in Japanese. It's a Japanese word for feelings. And we use this with parents, actually. We have a program called the Parent Support Network that is really meant to connect and support parents. But it's really meant for kids. And it's these little pillows. Disappointed. It's a mixed bag of emotions. Proud, kind. And it's really amazing how these little pillows work, and how if I had this mixed bag of emotions when my son wouldn't get out of bed, I would have just dumped them on the bed. And instead of trying to fix whatever exterior problem he was worried about that day, I would have said, let's kind of get at what's really going on. What are you feeling? And maybe he would say, well, I'm feeling really sad. Right. And then maybe say, you can feel sad, but do you think you can bring Brave along with you while you're feeling sad? I know it sounds really hokey, but it's a brilliant idea. And so I think in retrospect, if I had to say one thing about what would I have done differently, again, I have had 15 years now of learning. Yeah. And so hindsight's 2020. And I tell myself and all parents, you did the best you could with what you knew at the time. This is not I should have done this. I don't believe in should-haves. You do the best you can with what you know. Right. But knowing what I know now, if we as a world would understand the importance of social emotional learning for children, and if we as a world would learn to talk openly about our mental health the same way we do about our physical health, then you would treat it differently. 100%. You would get help sooner when you felt, parents, we know if our kid has a fever to take them to the doctor. Right. We don't know what the fever signs are. for mental health with our kids.
Right.
And so we need to learn. Knowledge is power. We need to learn more, and we can't do that as long as we're blocked into this feeling of, oh, we can't talk about mental illness in children because kids can't have mental illness. So I could go on and on about the term mental illness too.
Yeah, we could definitely dive into that. First of all, I love those little pillows. Have you seen the movie Inside Out?
Yes, I love it.
That really
exactly like this.
Yeah, it's a fantastic film to sort of help kids identify and understand feelings, and I think pillows are brilliant.
In fact, I wanted to tell you we could do a giveaway. I can
fantastic!
Give away a bag of these.
Yes. Okay. Cool. We'll get that set up.
So
giveaway of the kimochis.
Yes, they're kimochis
Pillows. All right, that's fantastic. That's a great one.
A mixed bag of feelings.
I like it. Okay, we'll get that set up.
So,
the other mixed bag of feelings. So one of the things that you would have done was have got help sooner. He had CBT, which I also think is fantastic, and all these other treatments. You know, taking a child to a mental health professional. A lot of the time, kids will just go and get medicated, and then there won't be any of that help. And so I hate medication, and I know that in some instances it is incredibly vital, so I'm not saying stop taking your meds. I have to be very clear about that. However, just drugging kids and people without the treatment, I think, is very damaging.
I 100% agree with you. And I have a lot of theories about medication. I think I feel the way you feel, which is there are times when it's necessary, but it's not the answer. To me, medication is helpful to get a person to a place where they're stable enough to engage in therapy and to engage in the other techniques that could be helpful for your mental health.
Right.
And you're right. So I never recommend that a parent start with medication. You don't start with medication. And we started with cognitive behavioral therapy. And what happened for my son is it was too late. He was already so ill. I didn't know it, but his brain was already so just not working well that he wanted the tools to work. But then when he was faced with a situation that would put him in a panic, he just couldn't do it. Yeah. He couldn't do it. And he was 9. And then when it became life-threatening, when we're talking about suicide, he became a danger to himself. And the doctor who he'd been working with for a while on the CBT had said, this is deeper and scarier, and we're not getting to it fast enough. We really need to consider antidepressants. And, it's funny because people say, oh, well, parents just are drugging their kids. It took a lot out of me to agree to that. It was not a lighthearted decision at all. Yeah. But in the end, you needed to live.
Right. Yeah.
And then, of course, there are all sorts of problems that happen with medication. And I try to tell parents when it comes to your kids, it's one of the many tools. It can be, but it's really complicated with children because every person, well, it's the same with adults. Everybody reacts differently to different kinds of medications. And when a child's growing, it's like, you get to a place where then they grow an inch and everything changes, or they go through adolescence and everything changes. It's not a magic answer. And if you want to try medication, sometimes you have no choice. But you have to engage in all of the other things too. It's environment, it's learning skills and parenting. It's hard to parent a child who's really struggling with serious mental health problems. And we need help with that because it's not natural. The regular things don't work.
Exactly. And also for parents that haven't experienced it, like there's no point of reference. It's like, I can only imagine. I want to get into sort of how the Youth Mental Health Project helps parents. I want to move into that.
Sure.
So if we can move to the Youth Mental Health Project and what that is and how that got going, that'd be great.
Sure. So when I decided I was going to speak out in the world and tell my story. And I started this support group. And parents were just flooding in every month. And I started hearing the same kind of stories over and over and over again. The themes of the complications around parenting a child who is struggling, the complications of educating a child like that, and finding help, of not being understood. I decided I really, again, needed to speak out. So I did a massive search of all the not-for-profits in the mental health space to find one to volunteer for that would really speak to this issue about children. Because we have in our country, and I think the statistics are somewhere around 63 million, 1 in 4 adults who struggle with some kind of mental health, diagnosable mental health condition. And that's 63 million Americans. But half of all of those lifetime cases start before the age of 14. Mm. So if we really want to be serious about early intervention and prevention, we have to start talking about children. So who is out there in this space talking about children? And I couldn't really find a national organization that was dedicated to changing the narrative around children. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of other great organizations that I'm huge fans of, mm-hmm. but they weren't speaking to it in a way that I felt was accessible mm-hmm. to young parents.
Right.
So I don't know if you're familiar with some of the big organizations out there. NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness, is great. Depression Bipolar Support Alliance, Mental Health America, great organizations, but they're really focusing mostly on adults. And they're focused on mental illness. Mm-hmm. And what I thought is we need to focus not just on mental illness, we need to focus on mental health and mental health awareness and social emotional learning. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really set out to start a not-for-profit, but when I realized that there was this hole and no one was filling this hole. And I still, to this day, can't believe there isn't another national organization out there like this. There are a lot of local organizations. I'm not saying there's no organization that exists, but there are a lot of parents working in silos, mm-hmm. in communities, doing great, great work. But how do we change the narrative of the whole country if we're not all, working together? So. Yeah. So that's why I started it. And during the beginning process of developing the Youth Mental Health Project as a 501c3, I was in the right place at the right time with someone who wanted to make a movie. Mm-hmm. And I said, I have a story for you. Mm-hmm. So we made this movie called No Letting Go. And I wasn't sure it would really turn into a real movie. Mm-hmm. But I figured, okay, I'll have this great educational piece and I'll have this great conversation piece for communities to take out into the world and really educate people about this experience of raising a child who struggles with mental health problems. And so that's how it all kind of started, and it spiraled from there because the movie then got us out into the world. I started doing a lot of traveling and speaking. I do a lot of public speaking with the film and without the film. And what I discovered everywhere I went was that parents were alone mm-hmm. and had no support system. And they weren't being included in the conversation. Mm. And that's when we started to focus on what programs could we have that would really speak to parents. So the Youth Mental Health Project is only 3 years old. And I think given our short lifespan,
great, yeah,
I think we've done pretty well. Mm-hmm. And we've developed a host of educational materials, all of which are free on our website. And we worked with clinicians to take the facts and make them speak to parents in a friendly language. Mm-hmm. Language is so important. Mm-hmm. And how we talk about mental health is so important. And so we integrated the clinical, some would say, with the parent perspective. Mm-hmm. And how can we just talk about this in a way that will help us talk about our kids? So we developed a lot of educational materials. I continue to go around the country and do workshops and speaking. And we developed a concept called the mental health continuum, which is not a brain surgery. I didn't make it up. It's just a thing. I just put it into words and language that I hope people can understand. And I can go back to that in a minute if you're interested. And then I thought, parents should have support groups in any community. Now, you could find AA or, cancer support groups. I'm a cancer survivor. So you can find support groups for almost anything except for this.
Right.
Why?
So it's like a network where they can they're plugged in and connected.
Yeah. So the Parent Support Network was developed. It's a replicable, scalable model for in-person, confidential, free support groups.
Excellent.
Like an AA, for instance. And the idea is ultimately that there would be one in every community. And that parents would know where to go to find their people, to find other parents like them when they were struggling. And it's not necessarily meant for only parents who have kids with the diagnosis. I want parents who have an 8-year-old who are worried about and not sure to be able to go to the support group and kind of hash out, is this something I should be concerned about? Is this something that I can do something about? What should my approach be? Because it's not playground conversation.
No, it's definitely not. And where else is that information available? So for anyone what would be your recommendations or advice to people, not just parents, just sort of us, like, if you've got younger siblings or just kids that or whatever, friends' kids, what are things to look out for? And what are sort of conversations or questions that you could ask the kids? I'm curious about that because not all of us are parents, but all of us might know kids.
And I have to tell you, my theories work for all ages.
Yes, and that's kind of what I'm hoping for too. Yes. What do we say to people, or how do we look out for people that we love that might be struggling?
So I'm going to separate it into two things. One is how we use language and why the use of language, if we shifted it and shifted our mindset, would help us in talking about it in general. That's the first part of the answer. And the second part of the answer is, how do you know what to look for? In terms, how do you know when to go seek professional help? So they're related to each other, but they're different. So I'm going to start with this issue of language. So mental health lies on a continuum, and we seem to see it as binary. You're either mentally ill or you're not. And so if you're not, you don't have to think about it, right? And that's just false. It's just false. So what we understand about physical health is that it lies on a continuum. We know sometimes we're going to get a cold, we're going to get the flu, we're going to get bronchitis or pneumonia, we're going to end up in the hospital. I had breast cancer. I was very sick for a year. We know that. We know that people live with chronic physical health conditions that they manage. Diabetes is one example. So I want to ask you to think about, if it were a physical condition that you live with, like diabetes, and I'm no expert on diabetes, so those of you out there listening who have diabetes, if I don't get it right, I so apologize. It's you can have diabetes and be perfectly healthy. Now, that doesn't mean your life isn't harder. It doesn't mean you're not working really hard to manage your diabetes. And that takes a toll on you for sure. And you could be physically healthier than someone who doesn't have diabetes.
Yeah.
Having diabetes in itself doesn't make you an ill person, right?
Yeah.
So if we think about mental health the same way, mental health lies on a continuum. Sometimes you're really healthy and well, that's on this side, sorry. And sometimes you're ill. And you're everything in between.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but my mental health changes daily, and sometimes multiple times in one day.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And sometimes we have periods in our life that are really difficult with depression or anxiety, whether it's diagnosed or not.
Yep.
And there are people who live with chronic conditions that they manage. So I will tell you that my son has bipolar disorder. He's 22. He lives on his own. He pays all of his own bills without help from us because he makes his own money. He has pets. He has friends. He is a thriving, functioning person. So I don't believe he lives with a mental illness.
Right.
He has a condition that he manages, but he has more self-awareness than most people I know without a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And so we have this misunderstanding about mental illness as though all or nothing, and it's not. It's the term mental health is defined as a state of psychological, social, or emotional being.
So back to the idea of like, I'm just trying to bringing it back to the how observing in other. So what you're saying then is they're on that continuum. So you're going to see people at different stages and in different places. So being aware of that.
Right. So if it's our physical health and we think of it as on a continuum, there's a certain point where we know we go to the doctor.
Yeah.
That our physical health is sliding to the ill side of the continuum. We're not doing well. We're not feeling well. I have a fever. I can't go to work. I can't get out of bed. I'm sick. I know I'm becoming ill, or I'm already ill, and I need to be in the care of a physician of some kind. Right. So it's the same thing with mental health. If we're aware of this continuum, and we know it's going to fluctuate, it's going to ebb and flow. At what point do you know it's time to seek help? So I get back to the overall, when I think about any illness, I think about functioning. How are you functioning in the world? Can you get out of bed, or are you hospitalized, right? Or are you running the New York Marathon? How are you functioning in the world? And so that's the most important thing to look at. Now, what I'm going to tell you now is what you're looking for as a person. And it applies to adults, I believe, as well as children. But I think I explain to parents this way. Kids and adults have 3 spheres of life, essentially. If you can break them down into 3 spheres of life in a Venn diagram, right? You have your academic, if you're a student, or work life, if you're a working adult. That's this life. The one sphere of life. I'm doing this, but I realize you have people on podcasts who aren't going to be seeing me. So that's one sphere of life, academic or work life. Another sphere of life is social, your relationships with other people. Can you maintain relationships? Do you have a friend or 2 or more? Can you be in the world socially? That's the second sphere of life. And then the third sphere of life is really, when it comes to kids, I think of it as home life and self-care. Do you take showers? Are you taking care of yourself? Can you get along with your family?
Yeah.
Can you be in a house with your family and manage that? So there are these 3 spheres of life. And I try to emphasize that you don't have to, if you're not functioning well, if your functioning is impaired in any one of those spheres of life, that's a sign. You don't have to be impaired in every sphere of life. So I would argue that my son, when he had about 2 years where he could barely go to school, he wasn't functioning in his academic life. He couldn't even get to school. And so he wasn't functioning in that sphere of life.
Yeah.
And so now that's an extreme example. So you're looking at these 3 spheres and you think about, are you impaired in any way? Right? So what's your impairment? What's your level of impairment? And if you're in bed with a fever, you know you're impaired, right? So when it comes to thoughts, feelings, and behaviors for kids, and again, I think this applies to all humans, there are 3 things to look for. The first is intensity. How intense are those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, right? My son at one point, when he was young, got very upset because I handed him the wrong fork. And when I say very upset, I mean a massive breakdown that was so extreme, he threatened to kill everybody in the house. It was intense. it was intense in relationship to what was happening. It's the wrong. So that's intensity. Duration is the second thing. How long do those episodes or feelings or behaviors last? I would submit that 3 hours of hysteria over a fork is way too long in duration. And then frequency is the third thing. How often do those things happen? So with my son, it got to a point where almost every day, something extremely intense that would last forever, would seem like it would last forever, would happen. So I'm gonna summarize this. I'm gonna go backwards a little bit. If you look at functioning in your 3 spheres of life, or your child's 3 spheres of life, and then you look at thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in terms of intensity, duration, and frequency, how that impacts the functioning. Right? I know it's sounding really complicated.
No, it's making sense. Yeah.
But the most important thing is, are you functioning? And as you know, I think I heard on one of the podcasts, you've struggled with your own stuff. I've struggled with depression and struggled with anxiety. And, some days I function a lot better than others. And, I know if I'm not functioning for a period of time that's lasting longer than it should, then I need a little help. And we get confused because we think functioning means, oh, I can't get out of bed. But as long as I can get out of bed, that means I'm functioning. I would argue that's not really true, because getting back to the continuum of, how hard is it for me to function? So, we do have this perception that, well, he's doing okay. Well, if your kid had a fever and they were plugging through and going to school, even though they were sick, you wouldn't just say, all right, well, it's okay. So these are things that I try to teach, and I give a whole workshop on this, which takes like an hour. So I really jammed in a lot of information in a short period of time, but we're not used to thinking of those things.
Right.
So
this is, and it's just such very helpful information that you might not necessarily, like, just thinking of a parent that wouldn't, or just someone that wouldn't know that, someone reacts in that way, you're like, why would they do that? And then you kind of have this understanding, oh, maybe there's something deeper, maybe there's some issues going on here, and now we can address it, rather than just be in that place of confusion or whatever. And
it's very confusing. And by the way, on our website, everything I just said, we've developed into free downloadable materials. So we have a visual on the continuum, and we have this whole explanation in writing, so that nobody has to memorize it. It's free on our website. Go check it out.
It's a fantastic website, ymhproject.org. We'll have links to that in the show notes and everything. You've got all those resources. You've got just so much information on there. It's such a good resource website. And I was also wondering where people can watch the No Letting Go movie, because I know you do screenings, in-person screenings, and you go and do talks and presentations and stuff. Is it only in person, or is there any online way that people can watch it?
No, I love doing community screenings because it's an opportunity to really talk to people and get at this whole concept of how can we talk about mental health in a healthy way, and not in a scary illness way, but in a way that really embraces this whole concept of it lying on a continuum. But that being said, you can view the film on Amazon. It's free on Prime. I believe it's on Google Play, and it's on a bunch of different online platforms. There are probably more than I even know what they're called. But the easiest one is Amazon, and it's on Prime. So, but I do love doing public screenings. That's just a favorite of mine.
Yes, and you have one coming up in New York City on the 29th of May. So information for that is on the website. And you've also got like a list of all the other screenings on the website, so people can get to those too. But I'm glad that it's on Prime, because I have that, and now I can watch that.
I can't wait to hear what you think. The film is based on my own true story. It's a true story. So just when people are watching, the spoiler alert is that the mom survives, because here I am.
It's gonna be like, no, what are you saying? And I'm like, no, of course you're here.
And one of the things I love about it is that when I go to talk, it's a heavy movie. It ends hopefully. It's a hopeful ending, but it's heavy. And I love to talk after it because I like to say, here I am. And I'm still standing, and my family is still standing, and my son is alive and doing well and living on his own. And we can make a difference. We can change how people see this and talk about it. And then I love engaging with audiences. So I'll have parents that say, well, I have a friend or a neighbor who's really struggling. What should I do? What should I do? And here's my advice. Treat them the same way you would as if their child was in a car accident or had cancer. You know, this is traditionally not a casserole thing, but it needs to be. Parents need support and understanding and not judgment. So if that means, you know, offer to bring a meal or go to the grocery store, you know, treat it as you would any other condition. And see them as people struggling with a health condition, then that could really make a huge difference in somebody's life.
I love it.
So it's uplifting in my mind.
I think so. I look forward to seeing it, but I feel that it will be. I try not to I don't shy away from heavy, serious things because, you know, I say to people like uplifting content isn't just fluffy cat videos. That's not the purpose of it. We can talk about real things that matter and that are hard, but it's what the message that you're leaving with people afterwards. And if it is that you can get through this, other people have done it, you can do it, here are some ways, then to me, that is the ultimate uplifting. So
I think so too.
Fantastic. Yeah.
That's why I love your content, because it is about real. I feel, you know, bad things happen in life. Good things happen, bad things happen. That's part of life. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what you do with that and how you deal with it. And you can use your experiences for good, which is what I've tried to do. I really felt that all of this happened for some reason. And I am compelled to get out there and try to use that experience to make a positive difference for other families so that it won't be as hard maybe in a generation or so. I have a lot of hope because I think generations younger than me, like yourself, but even younger, they understand how vital this issue is.
Yeah,
they really do, and they're open. We just need to give them the tools.
Yeah.
You know, we just need to give people the tools and let them know it's okay. You know, one thing I have to say is when we have a baby, I don't know if you have children, but when you have a baby, you know that you don't expect the baby to have the same physical health their whole life, right? But you learn what the right feeding is and you know, vitamins and washing hands, and we've learned how to help keep our children as physically healthy as we can. No one thinks about their baby's mental health, and babies are born with mental health just like physical health. It's just their state of being, and they're going based on biology, genetics, environment. Things are going to ebb and flow in their mental health just like they are in their physical health, and we just shouldn't be ashamed of it or afraid of it.
Here. Well said. Randi, thank you so much for your time and for speaking with us today, and for offering to give away those very cool mixed bag of feelings, the kimchi's pillows. Is that kimochis?
Kimochis.
I think that's a food.
And honestly, I don't make these. This product is not mine. We partnered with this company because I'm a huge believer in what they do. You can, however, and we'll give these away. They've got all sorts of great products. But if anyone wants to purchase them through our website, which takes you to their organization, if you look under the parent support section of our website, then they will donate a small portion of the proceeds back to us. So that's always a bonus. But it's not my product. So I just am a big believer in it. So.
It's under the shop and support thing too, I think.
Yes, that's right. Shop and support.
Love it.
Yeah. And they've got other great products also, but that's my favorite one. And yes, you'll let me know how we're going to give these away. I'm happy to ship them off.
Appreciate it. We'll get that all set up, and links for that giveaway will be in the show notes, everyone. Thank you so much for listening or watching. I will see you soon this next week. And thanks again, Randi, for just everything you're doing and your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ione. Back to you.